same apple sours that I was drinking during the St. Patrick's Day episode.
Oh, I love that.
It's fermented.
I love that.
Okay. Oh.
Fuck me. Hi and welcome back to White Noise. Today is our first year anniversary video, so we thought we would make it special and actually film it.
Yeah.
Today we're going to be talking about Rocky Horror because it is one of me and Skye's shared favourite films ever, and it just felt right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool. I think we're both like super nervous to actually be on video this time. Like Lyanna has experience doing it, but I have none. So I think you should be the more confident one. You have no excuse.
Well, that experience from a long time ago, the YouTube channel, that is now dead. But yeah, like I said, we're doing Rocky Horror today because me and Skye bonded over it a lot as teenagers. We've mentioned a lot in this podcast that we have a lot of shared favourites. That's kind of why we do this. And I think Rocky Horror is one of the ones we don't talk about enough, considering it's a fundamental shared love.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I'm not even sure what we kind of want to start talking about today. Like, I mean, I think we wanted to bring up just the fact that how crazy is it that it's our 1 year anniversary of doing this podcast.
And we're also recording this a bit early because me and Skye haven't seen each other in a year. This entire podcast has been a pandemic baby, essentially. It's a product of the pandemic. It's all done over Zoom. And we just thought it'd be really nice to actually film something together in person to celebrate the 1 year, because it's not even 12 episodes. It's going to be, what, like 15? Considering the minisodes.
Yeah, that's true, actually.
Maybe more, because we've got some ideas coming up for stuff we've not recorded yet, but will come out before this.
These next few months can be really exciting. But yeah, I mean, it's just so exciting to be able to record something in the same room together.
I actually really like it. It felt awkward for the first 5 minutes, like, hence the egg cup shots. But, like, this actually feels really nice.
Yeah. The only time we ever did this was the unreleased Suspiria recording.
And I know we've, like, referenced that a bunch. One day we're going to have to redo it. Or post snippets on Twitter or
maybe
something.
post snippets, because it wasn't our best, but it was really it was funny.
It was good. We were just wasted, and we tried to almost recreate the atmosphere of that first exciting one that never saw the light of day by having drinks and watching Rocky Horror last night. Yeah, so that was fun.
It's a shame we couldn't record us watching it, because like as we were watching it, we were like, oh, like it was just so much fun, and we noticed so much about it that we didn't notice before, because like we've watched it together before. But we were just like so excited by watching it. We would be too busy singing and dancing that we just wouldn't. Yeah, that's true. Really talk about it.
And it wouldn't have been the same if we watched it over Zoom. You can't watch a musical together over Zoom. I know I've done Mamma Mia with people, but like Rocky Horror, you can't do that. You've got to be in that room together, have that vibe.
Well, especially something like Rocky Horror, because everybody knows that like there is the film, but then there is also the production, and it's just because it is one of the most iconic audience participation productions. I think when you watch it with somebody else and you get that atmosphere, like you can get a whole production atmosphere with just two people.
Exactly. Especially like if you're singing it in your room and then you also double bill it with the Glee episode, which is what we did last night.
Yeah, which we will be talking about. We understand how controversial the Glee episode is, but we have some stuff we want to say.
We want to clarify that we were kind of introduced to Rocky Horror through the Glee episode, so it holds a special place in our hearts.
Yeah, which I think a lot of people of our age, if they're honest with themselves, that is why. Like, I'm not ashamed to admit that, because in all honesty, I think I probably would have ended up watching it anyway because of just my parents and all the stuff that they liked, but it was because of that episode that I discovered it, and I was like, this makes so much sense to me. Well, the actual film didn't make any sense to me, but I understood watching it, like, this is it. This is my aesthetic, as you can probably tell.
Yeah, like, it's not super obvious. We're like, let's do some, like, subtle kind of allusions to Rocky
we
Horror.
didn't want to go crazy and go, like, full dress up, because that's just too obvious.
I'm also going to blame it on the fact I couldn't get a good costume in time, so red lipstick will do for me.
I mean, bless Lyanna. Like, I was lucky because we're at my flat, but, like, Lyanna had to travel with all her equipment, so, like... Don't come for her just because she has like
the camera right now is sat on a tripod, which I forgot the clip bit too, so it's got scrunchies around it. This is very like mishappy, misshapen, but we've made it work. This had to happen.
To be honest, that's been this whole podcast.
Oh god, yeah.
Like the amount of times that, like I said, the first one just didn't get released, and then there was a year between that Suspiria one and then actually recording the first official podcast.
That's mad.
Which means that this has been in the making. Effectively,
we've wanted to do it for a long time, because I remember when I was designing Obscure, which is the site I run, I remember saying to you I wanted it to branch off and have other things underneath it, which White Noise is, believe it or not. And we talked about that back then, and then Obscure launched in September 2019, but this didn't launch until August 2020. Yeah. So yeah, nearly a year. Yeah. That's crazy.
Crazy. It's exciting though.
Yeah.
I gotta say, like, to toot our own horns for a bit, I'm proud of us, like, for being able to pull this through between working the jobs that we did and everything like that, and somehow still managing to find the time to do it. Sometimes we will be recording at like midnight because we couldn't find any other time to do it.
St. Patrick's one was recorded at like 1 a.m. on like a Tuesday or something.
And that's a perfect example of when I wish we'd done video, because Lyanna was like in the corner of her bedroom just like with her microphone, like just
trying to be quiet,
whispering in.
That's another thing. We started this out and we just like had no idea about how to even do a podcast. We're like, let's just do it because we've got shit to talk about. And now we're both just like figuring out how to edit. We've both got equipment. Like, it's just kind of grown quite quickly.
I was gonna say, I mean, debatably we are definitely still figuring it out. But I mean, just look at us now. Like, a year ago, would I have thought that we were gonna actually have full-on recording?
This is crazy. Like, literally, like, I feel like look, you can't see it obviously through the podcast itself. I sat here with my arms on the table, but sat here looking all fancy. We've got a mic in front of us, laptop here, we can see the audio recording, camera in front. We're fucking professional people.
And extremely intimidating.
Exactly. And that's why we're talking about Rocky Horror. Like I said earlier, we watched it last night before doing this episode, and we double billed it with the Glee episode. And I feel like I'm adequately ready to talk about it.
The Glee episode?
Well, I'm going to talk about the Glee episode later. I mean actual Rocky Horror, because I hadn't seen it in years. That's my first thing I want to know.
I probably hadn't seen it in about a year, which is, I mean, it's always on my mind. It's always a part of my life. But I hadn't actually sat down and watched all the way. Like, I think you said it was the kind of thing that sometimes you'll put it on when you're doing other stuff because it's just so nice to have in the background. But like actually sitting down and watching it,
the entirety,
so much fun.
Considering that we both noted last night that we think the second half is weaker. Like, I would always put on the first half and go, and then turn it off. I mean, I imagine everybody who is watching this, crazy to say watching it, but has seen Rocky Horror, because it's just so iconic. Or if not, maybe you've seen the Glee episode. But yeah, we realised that as much as we love it, obviously the story is so convoluted and it goes on for like, well, it's not even that long, but it's just that the story's crazy. It doesn't make sense, and then as soon as they try to start making it make sense is when it goes a bit downhill. But even we were saying that like there are some songs from the second half of the film that I think get looked over because the second half is a bit weaker. It is, but like the thing is, you need that. There's that basic rule of storytelling, you know, you get 3 parts, 3 act structure, and this film just kind of like, you know, it tries to adhere to it, because at the end of the day you do need a bit of a story. But the main thing with this is just the music, you know, and
the music, the costumes,
and it's so easy to forget the songs in the second half, because those ones in the first half are just iconic. Anytime you ask anyone about a song from Rocky Horror, they're going to tell you a song within the first half hour of the film. They're going to tell you Time Warp, they're going to tell you Damn It Janet, what else? Touch, touch, touch me.
I mean, we were talking last night about like how all of the songs have some kind of plot relevance apart from Time Warp. And I actually found out it's because it was added just because the film was too short. I don't know if it was in the original production. I will admit, I have seen a modern day production of it twice, obviously, because I'm only 24. I wouldn't have seen the original. But yeah, so I didn't know a lot about the production before it became the film, but yeah, I'm pretty sure they said that they added it just simply to flesh it out a bit, which is why it doesn't make any sense in the film. It's probably the craziest part of it all, because it's just a party scene that they added. I'm pretty sure they said something like they wanted to simply add it so Columbia could do the tap dancing scene, which is so iconic. But you're right, it's one of the most famous kinds of a dance. I mean, everybody talks about now that, you know, songs getting released need to be TikTok worthy so they can have a dance. Time Warp was before its time, literally.
The thing is as well, like, I find with Time Warp, because it's so stupid, that's why it's so memorable. So the fact that it has no relevance to the plot actually helped that song become so iconic. We were talking last night about how the brilliance of a lot of musical songs is when they just don't make sense. Like, there's no relevance to the plot, is when they just don't mean anything. Like, we need that more in more modern day musicals, and it just makes sense in like some campy, low-key shitty 70s musical that you just have songs that make no sense. I love that about Rocky Horror.
I mean, something we really noticed last night that it kind of baffles me, we didn't really pick up on it before, is how imperfect it is. And I don't just mean like how crazy the storyline is or how the songs are all over the place, but I mean like the costumes are great, but like they're not perfect. They don't even fit everybody perfectly. The makeup, when it runs, like there's this one scene at the end where obviously everyone knows that Frank has that boss tattoo. When he comes out, it's faded and nobody retouches it. Did you know it was all filmed in 6 weeks?
Yeah, I can imagine.
Like, we were joking, thinking like, oh, it's probably because it's all taken in one shot. It pretty much was.
Yeah. But that's how you get that energy. That's how you get that fusion, like a real life stage production.
Yeah.
And that's why I love the imperfectness as well, because with real life stage production, you can't go and quickly do up people's makeup in between every single 5-minute scene. You just can't.
Or if something goes wrong on stage, you've just got to roll with it.
It just provides that energy, which is what I love about Rocky Horror. There's just so much energy to it, like sexual energy, campy energy, queer energy, like just everything about it feels like a lightning in a bottle moment to me. And it's just perfect. Like I don't think it could have been made by any other people in any other era of time.
No, I mean, we spoke about how, like, I don't think, because so we've spoken about like queerness in horror and things like that before, and how like the 80s was really the pinnacle of it. But we were speaking last night about how like the 80s kind of started going back into queer coding, and being more about subtleties and metaphors, whereas in the 70s you had films like Rocky Horror that were just so overtly camp that it was just like it's mad, because I actually always forget it came out in 75. I'm pretty sure it was 75, wasn't it?
75.
Because it's like you just wouldn't think something like that would be coming out.
But then if you look at like the progress of film, you also would, because the 70s is the American New Wave, like I was saying to you. This is when you get all these auteurs and directors coming up who are like the new generation, and they're trying to push the envelope, push the boundary, and they're just doing something crazy. What I found really funny when we were watching the Rocky Horror Glee episode was when Mr. Shu is saying to the kids, he's like, oh, I did this for all the wrong reasons, this story isn't for the envelope pushers, and it's like, it is. Like, that's literally what it's about. Like, it's literally, and I'm not saying it's like insane for the sake of being insane, you know, it's like it represents the queer community, it's like a lot of representation, just all this stuff. But at the end of the day, it was boundary pushing to be boundary pushing. You know, and that was a lot of 70s film. And like, yes, I know this was just like a musical that turned into a film musical, but I think it's a perfect example of that 70s era of movies. It's great.
I mean, because it had like, obviously it was like the big trend of midnight releases, because it didn't commercially, it didn't do well, people didn't want to go see it, but then at the midnight showings people ate that shit up.
And consider as well, it started out in London as a stage production. That didn't necessarily translate well to America, you know, because like London was like 70s London, you're thinking like grit, big queer community, all this shit. And that doesn't necessarily mean American audiences are going to take to it straight away, but the kind of people going to midnight movie showings, like that's that crowd. It was the perfect crowd for them. I think if I've like read right, it was like some exec was just like, this movie's making no money. It had a budget of only 1.4 and it was barely making that, so they were like, let's stick it on the midnight movie circuit. Built word of mouth, which, you know, is something of that era as well, word of mouth, and you slowly push out to more cinemas. So, you know, it has a small opening, you build over it week after week, to the point where a lot of cinemas show Rocky Horror every Friday night at midnight to this day, and it's just become a staple.
I mean, one of the reasons that we referred earlier to the Glee episode as controversial is because, especially when it first came out, purists and lovers of Rocky Horror were like, you can't touch it. And even though to an extent we understand that, again, we'll be talking more about why it was, that episode was important to us, but it's because like back then you didn't have internet access to see all these crazy things. You know, you didn't have mainstream stuff like RuPaul's Drag Race. Depending on however you feel about the show, it has mainstreamed drag and brought it into the light. Whereas then, you know, you'd have to go to midnight shows, or you'd have to go to, you know, dark clubs to go see this kind of stuff. And then now it was being shown proudly and like literally in your face on screen. Whereas now you can Google and find that. So I'm not saying that people don't still need to be liberated of this day and age, but this is why I think especially even people of our generation hold on to these films, because it transcends time. Like, you can really feel, like you were even saying last night how amazing it would have been to have seen that in the cinema when it came out.
I can't even imagine, like when it was first coming out, like the power that would have held over people. And I think that I understand why people who would have been there for that original run would hate the Glee episode, you know, because like as much as you can love it or hate it, at that era, so this was in season 2 of Glee, so like at the height of its fame, wasn't it, really? That was the mainstream. That's what Glee stood for, the mainstream. And as much as it's like now lauded for like, you know, being that amazing queer representation, it helped a lot of people figure out who they are. At the time, Glee was hated. Like, even the people that liked Glee understood that it was hated. So for something so niche and cult and not underground, don't get me wrong, because it's so famous, but like that felt like it belonged to the underground.
Yeah.
For that to be displayed on something so mainstream and kind of altered in the way it was, I understand why people got mad.
Oh, I do. I mean, like I said, for us it was so different because I'm sure we've mentioned it on like other episodes of the podcast before, but like that episode was the reason that we ended up watching it, because we saw it, and like for me it was like I watched it with my dad and I was like, wow, the songs in this are pretty, because like the songs are the main part about it, obviously, and I was like, the songs of this are really cool. And my dad was like, well, you've obviously seen Rocky Horror, haven't you? And I was like, no. And then he just showed it to me, and look at where I am now. As we mentioned before, one of the brilliant things about Rocky Horror is how imperfect it is, and they tried to polish it in the Glee episode because it was...
I do think they acknowledge it quite well, though, because like Ryan Murphy is Ryan Murphy, and he's probably like, I want to do Rocky Horror, but I understand that in Glee we have to sanitize it a bit, and they kind of make that part of the storyline in the episode, which I'm quite happy about. You know, saying kids shouldn't be exposed to this stuff, and like it was just, it's so contradictory. Like looking back on that episode now, like, it contradicts itself a lot. It's like, let's show Rocky Horror, but let's also say maybe you shouldn't push boundaries. Like, what are you trying to say right now?
It doesn't work. I mean, like, because I'm sure I've looked before about like schools actually wanting to put on Rocky Horror as a production, but like secondary schools, high schools if you're in America. And it's understandable because these are underage kids. Obviously on Glee they weren't, but they were portraying underage children, so it would have been not that Glee always sent the best message anyway, but it would have been a really bad message to send, to have scantily clad kids all the way through.
They do talk about it in such a good way. That's what I like that they address though in the episode, is like the idea of like bodies in the show. Like when they start talking about Finn and Sam being who are they? Brad and Rocky. Yeah, they talk about like body positivity and like showing their bodies on stage and stuff like that. And like I was mentioning to Skye when we were watching Rocky Horror last night that that's something I never really understood was great about the production until I got older, was that it just like it showed bodies, and it wasn't like they were super on display. That was just their bodies.
Yeah, they were just
and they're
there.
Real bodies. You know, this is before the era of like Kardashians and stuff. It's just, that's what these people look like, and they're so chill about it. Like it's not even questioned. They're just there.
So yeah, it was really interesting. Obviously, when the Glee episode took, and specifically male bodies, because like even now, it's not something. I mean, obviously it's talked about more, but the fact that you had these two characters in Glee who were like, you know, you had Sam who's stereotypical athlete, and then you had Finn who was just your average guy. They both had body issues because of it, and like how they felt about it, and it was something really interesting to see the show talk about that. In all honesty, I didn't notice at the time when I watched it. It was only rewatching it probably mostly last night that I really thought about it. But funny you mentioning body is something something I mentioned when we were watching the film last night is like, since I was a kid and I watched it, it's always creeped me out how it looks like Rocky in Rocky Horror doesn't have a belly button. And we were watching it with my girlfriend, and both my girlfriend and Lyanna were like, it's just his body. So I found out actually they purposely filled his belly button because he's not meant to have an umbilical cord because he wasn't born. So I was justified in freaking out that his belly button just looks completely closed over.
That's mental. I thought you were just like,
nope,
being weird.
So if you've never noticed that before and you're a bit icky about body stuff like I am, go back and look at that.
Fuck.
Yeah, they filled it in.
That was actually such a cool little point.
It's cool, yeah. But I noticed it and I was like, oh, that's a bit strange. And yeah, I was justified.
That attention to detail's fucking insane. Oh, I love that.
That's why it's so crazy, because like, you have this really imperfect film,
and then
but at the same time they have these details.
But then that's aiding to like the whole Frankenstein themes. Yeah, you know, like man-made, perfect. But that's another thing actually. Now we talk about bodies in Rocky Horror. It's like there's this emphasis on Rocky's stuff, and he's wearing those tiny little pants, and he's the perfect man, isn't he? And he's so 70s in that way. Like he's blonde, he's got that beach bod and all this shit.
Yeah.
And I just like, I can't even explain things. It's not even that deep. I just love all the visuals in this film. I don't know. I don't even have to explain it.
You say like attention to details. There's like another bit that, like, I will admit I have scoured these tidbits from the internet, so don't hold complete validity in what I say. But I thought some other interesting ones was like in the lab scene where Frank's wearing that lab coat and he has a triangle on it is just like an interesting bit that they added. But apparently it's because during wartime that's how the Nazis used to identify gay men in the concentration camps, but they've turned it the other way, so it's a symbol of pride instead of repression. This is just going to be the interesting fact section. Apparently, as iconic as Tim Curry was as Frank and Meatloaf was as Eddie, originally there was interest in Mick Jagger playing Frank and Elvis playing Eddie, obviously before years ago into production. Like they because obviously they must have had, I don't know how long he must have had the idea that he wanted to turn it into a film, even before the original production, because correct me if I'm wrong, but I think even before the original production came out, Elvis had passed away.
Yeah.
So unless, you know, Richard O'Brien was just completely misinformed and news really didn't reach the UK that quick, he must have had it for years. Like,
that's mad.
Maybe that was the kind of character he wanted him to be. Maybe that's why he has this kind of magnetism about him.
You can't take Meatloaf out of Rocky Horror, though.
No. And we talked about how, like, if anyone has seen the stage productions, most of the time, not Meatloaf's, well, Meatloaf's character, Eddie and Dr. Scott are played by the same actor, which is typical in shows. Yeah. But it was, like you point out, it's purposely also because they're meant to be related. And apparently, Meatloaf did want to play both roles, but they just didn't. I don't know, maybe
I guess because in a film it's different, unless you want to go full like David Lynch with it and have like.
But then at the same time, it was like there's so much in that film that like.
I think it would have worked.
I think it would have
worked. Like as it is,
yeah.
That it just
I think it would have been hilarious. Like one of the funniest things is the fact that, like, especially on the stage one, like Dr. Scott's mustache and everything are so fake. Like you know who it is.
Don't get me wrong, I love the film. I think that's the way it had to differentiate itself from the production, because like you can handle craziness in a production a bit harder in a film, because not everyone who watches a film loves stage shows. They might like musicals, but they might like film musicals, not stage production.
Oh yeah, like I said to you that like the film is like minimalistic compared to the stage production. You would have thought maybe it would have been the other way around, like maybe because they can do a bit more, they have more time, even though for some reason they only had 6 weeks to shoot. But in the stage production, it's, at least in my opinion, it's so much more sexual than the film is, which is crazy. And yeah, there's so much more going on. There's like there's the song gets cut out from the original production that's not in the film, but it makes sense because it like messes with the pacing. But then even in the film, they wanted originally Susan Sarandon to do the touch me scene completely nude, and she said no. And it's so weird because it's like this film to me isn't as overtly sexual as it is, it's more titillating.
Yes.
Because if she had just been fully nude, it would have just completely taken away.
Doesn't it? Yeah. But then that's the power of the fucking 70s, because today that never would have even been a fucking conversation. You know what I mean? Yeah.
It would have been, ironically, it would have been too much. And not because it's like, oh, naked woman. It was just because it was that crazy... literally that craziness, and like hinting at stuff, but at the same time having some stuff that was so out there.
I always think of the silhouette scene where Brad and Janet both get with Frankenfurter. Yeah. You don't actually fucking see anything. It's all playing with light, and that's like my favourite scene of the fucking film.
Oh, it's amazing.
It's amazing.
Yeah.
I just love like how this film isn't just crazy in like its storyline, but also in its visuals. You know, like you were talking about costumes and stuff a bit. Also in just like the lighting and the set design, everything about it just feels wacky. I love it. It's like a dream.
It does. I mean, you know, again, we keep talking about how imperfect it is, but even the camera work, it's shaky. There's the zooms, the office-like zooms.
So
that they
70s,
do.
but that's
Crazy.
so 70s. Like to have those like whip pans and shit like that, and it's like I was saying earlier about the energy and like the lightning in a bottle moment. Like that wouldn't have happened in a different
And even the
era.
sound design. Like we talked about how like poor the sound quality effectively is, but not just because of the era it came out, because it seemed to be an intentional thing that they did.
Budget. But then it adds to it, doesn't it?
Yeah.
It gives it that like campy quality and that midnight movie quality and that B movie quality. This film wouldn't be the same if it was like polished and, you know,
it doesn't work. I mean, it's like when they tried to redo it a few years ago with like Adam Lambert and Laverne Cox and all of that. It was cool to see like you could tell that you had a group of people who obviously the show meant a lot to them and that's why they wanted to do it, and they didn't try and redo it as like the new Rocky Horror. It was just a fun thing that they did, but that was an example of like it looked good. That was the problem.
Too good,
it was too good. It was too polished. Like,
see, this is the problem now with everybody being able to access. This is the problem with everybody now having access to this like amazing equipment and being able to make high quality stuff. Is like, actually, that doesn't necessarily mean something's good. You know, I was saying to you last night, technical quality doesn't actually mean quality. Like, you know, there's like some great films like Texas Chainsaw and shit, which are like grainy as fuck, and that adds to the energy
it's
in
the
the world.
Nitty gritty of it. Yeah.
It's like. That's why I actually think a lot of horror movies today, like, they don't get that same grittiness. They can be like
they're too clean cut.
Exactly. I think like the last ones I can think of that really worked in that way were like the early noughties, like Saw and Hostel. They still had that leftover grittiness.
Oh, well, the torture porn ones.
Yeah, like, you know, it's shot on digital, like a lot of them, but they're still like not quite like 4K digital yet. You know, it's still got that air of like just dirt.
Oh yeah, it's not just specific to the horror genre. Like as much as obviously it's called Rocky Horror Picture Show, and it has horror elements and it's inspired. It's super campy, but like with actual horror, it just too clean cut doesn't work anymore. You know, like the whole point of that kind of genre is to make you uncomfortable, and like unfortunately now people push the boundaries more in like they make uncomfortable films, and like, you know, at some point we want to talk about those kind of films as well, but that'll be for another episode. But like, they think that groundbreaking and genre breaking now is making stuff that is uncomfortable, and you know, it makes you squirm, it makes you want to look away instead of just having this really nitty gritty look to stuff. And basically people are just concentrating too much on being perfect.
I know this sounds counterintuitive, but I think like sometimes like the content doesn't matter. You know, like, so say Texas Chainsaw, everyone thinks of that as being really gritty and horrifying. It's like, actually you don't see much. The actual content itself isn't as terrifying as like the visuals and the implication, you know? And I think like a lot of horror films now care too much about what's actually happening in the film, like less about the atmosphere.
That's true.
Because I think of a lot of Blumhouse movies, they've just got shit atmosphere.
They do. Like, they can have the most... Like, and again, with Rocky Horror, like, it had the strangest plot. Like, I only now, after watching it for so many years, could I even tell you what the actual plot is. But yeah, they put so much into plot that it's like everything else falls apart. And having a great plot is great, but at the end of the day, it's a film. It's not a book. With a book, obviously you want the plot.
That's what you're focused on.
With film, you can get away with having kind of like it's
plot. A visual medium, and I think a lot of people forget that. Like, I just, the one I always think of is The Invisible Man. Like, don't get me wrong, looks gorgeous, but it's very clinical, and I know that was kind of the point. I just didn't enjoy that. I like grit. But the thing with The Invisible Man was like they were so focused on plot and character that works well to me, but it was just like it just, you could tell where they had written the plot like beat for beat for beat, and then they're just doing scenes to fill in between those beats, if that makes sense. And I hated that about The Invisible Man, and I hate that about a lot of horror movies today. They don't cultivate an atmosphere like they used to. Like, don't get me wrong, there's standouts like Hereditary, The Witch, those kind of things. Like, I'm not just talking about A24 because like whatever, but you know, I just wish that a lot more people would like go back to the roots of the horror genre. Rocky Horror, like we're saying, it's not like crazy horror focused, you know, but it's still got those elements of horror in that, you know, it features like a little bit of gore. It's got that tension in it. It has more of an air of horror. I mean, it than has actual like content.
It has a whole song called Science Fiction. You know, Richard O'Brien did take huge aspects from science fiction, like Frankenstein and creature creating things like that. The gothic element of it, like the castle, it just worked. And I mean, we know that in some aspects we're going to be biased because those are the things that we love in film. But I really understand what you're saying, because it's like, as much as the point of any kind of storyline is to get from A to B, it doesn't have to be so obvious.
Yes, it doesn't have to be so clean cut.
You know? Like even something like Rocky Horror, that at one point, like, I feel like you can follow the film up until the middle point. And then after that, it's like, wait, what?
Which is funny because it's counterintuitive, because in Rocky Horror, when it starts trying to have a plot, it starts to fall apart.
Yeah, that is its worst part, is the fact that it tries to make sense of it, which was I say it's a shame. We're not here to do a critical analysis of it because we fucking love it. But we were saying last night that we wish maybe it just hadn't tried to do that, or it just stuck to like a Texas Chainsaw kind of thing, or maybe they were just psychotic murderers. You know,
just plant these people in this place in a situation and roll with it.
Yeah, you know, all of a sudden they started having accents and everything like that came through. I mean, originally, apparently Tim Curry did used to perform on stage with a German accent for Frank.
I love that.
And it was only when they went into filming that he decided to model his accent off his own mother and the Queen. And apparently Tim Curry met Princess Diana because of this film. And she said something along the lines of... I think I even wrote it down. Oh yeah, she said that apparently something like Rocky Horror had quite completed her education.
You gotta love her.
Yeah.
Good old Princess Di. Even like Princess Diana saying shit about this film, it just shows like it had such an impact. It affected so many people.
But it does. Its legacy is insane. And I mean, do you know that there's a sequel? There's a sequel called Shock Treatment. I've not seen it, and I originally didn't think it was a direct sequel. I'm not actually sure if it is. It's another musical. if you want us to watch it and review it, let us know, because I would be down.
Live reaction.
It follows Brad and Janet's story, but like
Susan Sarandon and what's his face?
No, see, this
what's
is
the point then?
It's like the perfect bad sequel. Like, you know, everything that's wrong with sequels, this seemed to happen in that film. The only recurring, not even recurring characters, I think, the recurring actresses are Patricia Quinn, Richard O'Brien, and Little Nell.
So the people from the original stage production, those three
as well, yeah. Tim Curry, I think maybe he didn't want to be in it, because originally
he probably knew that it was blasphemous.
The original story was going to be the Frank tracked down Brad and Janet because Janet was pregnant with his baby, and then Magenta and Riff Raff were going to come steal the baby.
Wait, that's actually kind of cool,
right?
Though.
It ended up being nothing like that. It was, as far as my knowledge is from not seeing it, it was about Brad and Janet being on a game show, but was actually, Brad got admitted to an asylum. That's as far as I know.
That sounds mad.
I think it would be interesting to watch.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, we've got some ideas for Halloween-y episodes, like sequels. That's all I'll say for now, but that could maybe go there.
I added, when I was like writing up my notes last night, I went onto the Google Docs and I added shock treatment onto the sequels we want to talk about, because like sometimes like sequels are fun, just to go off on a bit of a tangent here, and when they're bad they can be so funny, even though they definitely shouldn't have been made. But yeah, so that exists. They tried to recreate the horror I was gonna say, but yeah, they did recreate the horror. But yeah, it didn't work. It did even worse than the mainstream showings Rocky Horror did. I don't think it ever got a cult following. I think the only kind of cult following it ever received was from people who obviously loved Rocky Horror, and they just wanted to be a part of everything it was.
Jesus.
So yeah,
you know something's bad when like the die-hard fans are the only people who even give it a chance, and there's only a percentage of them.
Yeah.
Oof. Even if the sequel wasn't very good, you can still say that other stuff was greatly inspired by Rocky Horror.
Oh yeah, hugely.
And I'm not just talking about the Glee episode, you know? And I don't necessarily mean like, you know, oh, this character was influenced by this character, but just like the campiness of Rocky Horror has gone on to inspire so many other musicals and other people. We were talking last night about that kind of world of film and like, what would you even call it? Like, gritty campness. We were talking about John Waters. Like, I don't know if he was inspired by Rocky Horror or Rocky Horror was inspired by John Waters, but they're just linked in my head.
Or just of the era.
Yeah, and then consider as well, this is something we've not talked about yet, John Waters is so intensely known in the queer community for featuring LGBTQ plus people and like obviously Divine. Rocky Horror is such a statement amongst the LGBT community. Yeah. That's something we've not even touched upon yet. Yeah, that's true. I mean, I think it's just because, like, especially for us, and I guess anybody within the queer community who does love this film, because I appreciate it's not for everyone. Like, we spoke briefly about how, like, not everybody loves musicals, and, like, in our last mini-sode, or even our last mini-sode, in a mini-sode, we talked about how, like, we realised we were, like, leaning into a stereotype that the queer community love musicals isn't true, but we definitely do. Yeah. I think, the reason that we haven't really spoken about the queerness of Rocky Horror yet is because to us it's just so obviously queer. Yeah. That, like, it's almost like you don't speak about it. Yeah. But I can, like, again, I can imagine, even when I was watching it when I was younger, and, like, I hadn't come out, I don't think at that point I was even consciously questioning my sexuality, but watching it, and I related to it so much, and it did, like, as lame as this sounds, it did become a really integral part of my personality. Yes. You know, like, considering that, like, you know, almost most of the major aspects of the film borrow from you know, queer experiences. Like, there's a lot of drag elements. I mean, look at Frankenfurter. That's one of the biggest things that we also spoke about, is that, like, so I am a queer woman, but, like, there's something about Frank and, like, Tim Curry as him that even I'm like, that, like, people think that film gives them gay panic. That film gives me straight panic because I see him, he's not meant to look feminine. He is meant to look like he is a man in drag. And it's just so interesting they went down that aspect to do things, which is why, as, like, much as, you know, you can say that she killed it in the role, when Mercedes played Frank in Glee, it almost kind of felt like they were missing the whole point. I agree. Because they were focusing, look like a woman. Yeah, they were focusing more on the music, and obviously Mercedes did have this amazing voice, and that's why they picked her to do that song, even if, in my opinion, she belted it way too much. Like,
But yeah, it didn't work because she was a woman. Yeah. And it doesn't work in that role because that's not, I feel like, yeah.
A big part of like Rocky Horror is ambiguity and fluidity, and that's why it works in that regard. You know, Frank is not a trans woman. You know, Frank is a man in drag. Yeah. That is Frankenfurter. It just missed the whole point, the Glee episode. And I also think the Glee episode, it just, there's ways it doesn't work because like Rocky Horror does not mesh with the world of Glee, because we've been watching a bit of Glee this morning and last night, and we've noticed how much like biphobia there is in Glee. You know, like it's so like anti-fluidity.
Yeah, there was like that one episode in particular, but it happened. Did it all happen in one
Blaine
episode?
and Kurt.
Yeah, there's Blaine and Kurt, and then obviously Santana and Brittany, because they were the main queer couples.
Blaine kissed Rachel and then started to think, maybe I'm bi, maybe I'm fluid. Yeah. And Kurt was like, oh, bisexuality is just it's a stop to gay town. Yeah. And it's just so against fluidity, and it's like, but that's an integral part of Rocky Horror. Yeah. That's like the what would you call it, like the philosophy, the code of Glee does not mesh with Rocky Horrors. No. It's like missing one of the biggest aspects of Rocky Horror. Like, it's just what we were talking about so much last night in it. We're just like, it's not ever like, this is gay. It's just that person sleeping with that person. You know, they never stop and like say someone's gay. You know, they never say, oh, Frank's gay. Like, never. It's just, Frank sleeps with Janet, Frank sleeps with Rocky, Frank sleeps with Brad. And it's just, it's never a thing. It's just, it happens.
And I think, like, one of the comments we made last night, and that I feel like Ryan Murphy feels like everything he makes comes across as Rocky Horror. Like, he thinks that he's being so forward thinking and having that fluidity, but like that, like, those episodes that we watched afterwards about like having like, it kind of would have been cool if Blaine had ended up being a bisexual character instead of definitely gay. And then when
they made Brittany, it a joke, didn't they?
Yeah, when Brittany did come out as like fluid in her sexuality, Santana was like, no, you can't be. And it was kind of like, obviously, at least with Santana, because I think we both concluded we don't like her as a character, but at least with Santana, like, it was coming from a place of anger. It wasn't right, but it was coming from a place of anger. But it did just make us realise how, like, it seems to be like he has straight characters, he has gay characters. That's it.
Now I'm hearing us talking about this. We came into this episode like, let's not talk about Glee too much. Yeah. I just can't help but think about how meshed they are in my brain. Like Glee and Rocky Horror, because I discovered them like, you know, through each other. Yeah. And it's so funny to me right now that we're recording this during Pride Month.
Oh god, that's true.
This is our 1 year anniversary episode, but it's basically a Pride Month episode. So yeah, we're kind of serving both.
We've gotten so good at this podcast that we've recorded a bit in advance to do this. So also just any episodes that come out before this that seem a bit out of place, it's because for once we've recorded out of order. Yeah. But yeah, currently it's Pride Month as we're recording this.
Yeah, we're just in that gay mood. That's why like Glee's coming up so much. But because we've been watching Glee like this morning and last night, I couldn't help but notice how much biphobia is in that show. Yeah. And then considering we watched Rocky Horror literally last night as well, I just can't get over the different interpretations. Like, I can't understand how something made in the 70s was more open about fluidity than something made in, like, 2009,
But 10? I think it's because something we've spoken about before, that, like, there's empowerment in labels, but there's also empowerment in not having a label. And I feel like...
That's what Rocky Horror gets right.
Yeah, Glee lent way too much into thinking it had empowerment from having the labels, whereas Rocky Horror was just like... Yeah. You can interpret this how you want. Yeah. You know, you can, if your sexuality feels like you can identify with this character, then cool. Yeah. And it really left it open to the interpretation of people, and that's what it did so right. And it's also why now I think remaking it in any form other than the stage production that's still going, because obviously it carries on its legacy, it doesn't work because people try to read into it too much, which you could argue is what we're doing now. Yeah. You know, this is our point of views of it and our experience with it and how it affected us growing up. But yeah, now I feel like people would focus too much on, like you said, putting a sexuality or even a gender on Frank. Like, you know, he's always referred to as he, him, but it's never outrightly stated what he would like to be referred to as.
It just blows my mind to think that this film was so progressive in a way people probably didn't even realise at the time. Like, don't get me wrong, they knew it was very out there and progressive, but they probably didn't realise it would still be progressive in 2021. You know, to think it goes from that to then, as we were saying last night, the Reagan era of the 80s. Like, how does that happen? How do you go from, like, Rocky Horror to fucking, like, everything being straight?
I mean, you're right, it's crazy because, like, we were even thinking as we were watching it, like, because this is the first time we didn't want to analyse it and take it apart too much, but this is the first time we've ever watched it knowing we were going to talk about it again. So there were things we noticed that we never noticed before, and it's like really iconic stuff. Like, the costumes. You know, you have a scene with Columbia wearing the Mickey Mouses and her pajamas. Like, that's so iconic. And it's like, did they know at the time what it was going to be for people?
Well, I think even in the mid-70s, people knew Disney was fucked. You know, it's just aged very well. You know, like, I think there's just so many things in that film which just got better with age. You know, that's just one of many. That scene where Frankenfurter goes between Brad and Janet's room, it's almost like polyamory. You know, like, it's, I don't know, like, there's just so much about it.
You could read into it a lot, basically. And I feel like it's like the equivalent of, you know, like when you're in English at school and the teacher's like, why did the author say this? And it's like, maybe just because they wanted to say it. A lot of that, I feel like, is what Rocky Horror is, but people have taken from it what they want. And it's so interesting how you described it as, like, it like brings the audience in, because one of the biggest things about the actual stage production is the audience participation. Like, you really are drawn into it, and it's an emotional experience seeing it live, because there's times when I've gone and seen it and there was like a guy dressed up as Frank in the front row, and when Frank was singing Coming Home, he got up and they held hands, and it was just a moment, like, because also I've never seen a huge like theatre. It's always been in like small theatres. So it gives that, it's very intimate.
Power, yeah. I think, considering that, you know, people have always had a one-sided relationship with films, you know, like, they get invested in something, it's nice knowing that Rocky Horror Productions is still going on, because it means it can be reciprocated. You know, the people portraying these characters can then, like, give something back to the audience. It's not completely parasocial. Like, everything today is, like, parasocial, isn't it? This is one of those rare things that isn't. You can, like, get that energy back and forth, and it just creates, like you say, that intimate atmosphere in that theatre. I think that's cool. I need to go see a production so badly.
You do need to go see a production. I mean, I as soon as they're up and running again and it's safe and I have money to do it, we should go.
Yes,
because you would love it.
Oh my God.
And I mean, it's so nice, because I am someone, and I'm sure a lot of people feel the same, that, like, my anxiety doesn't let me enjoy audience participation. Like, it scares me, but it's not forced. Like, it's either, well, everybody does it. They never point someone in the audience and they're like, you have to now join. It's little stuff, like, they encourage everybody to bring props. So, like, during you know, there's a light, everybody has a candle and they wave it in the air, and it's like, you really feel like part of the production. It's just so nice.
It always makes me think of that scene in Perks of Being a Wallflower.
Yes.
When I think of productions of Rocky Horror, I think of that scene where they're performing it in front of the screen and everyone's shouting and everyone's dressed up, and it's just like, there's a sense of home to it, you know?
But I loved that kind of scene in Perks of Being a Wallflower, because it was so minimal, and it's like, you could perform Rocky Horror with just the actors and it would work. You don't need everything else around it, and that's why
it just adds to it, doesn't it?
Yeah, I think that's why people connect to it so much, because it does have the, and to be honest, if you don't like it as a film, I'm not saying that this is the reason, but most of the time it's because people don't feel that connection. It is a film that you can just think it's too much, you can think it's too weird, you cannot like it because it's difficult to follow, but, like, for me, it's just a film that I watch and I can't sit still when it's on, you know, like, I've got to dance, like,
you gotta get involved,
you really do.
I mean, like, for some people that's Mamma Mia, you know? I mean, for me it is Mamma Mia too, but there's just something about Rocky Horror which is, like, on another level for me, and I think it massively is the queer representation, you know, and it's like, the fact that it's not just like representation, it's like a celebration without just being like gay, like gay pride. It's like, it's not even talking about the fact it's gay, it's just like gay and happy, you know, like, I don't know, they're just having fun, they're vibing.
It doesn't feel like it's trying to make a point. I mean, maybe it was, I mean, I guess it must have been trying to make a point to come out when it did, doing what it did, but it doesn't feel like that, especially even now. It just feels like it was of an era, but at the same time it just felt like they knew what it was going to mean to people.
I agree.
Or at least they had such high hope that it would, that it
resonate,
just carried on. Like, we were watching it last night and it came to the end and I said to Lyanna, I was like, wow, I feel really emotional. Like, when it comes to the end. That's the
power of Rocky Horror as well. It all comes to this crescendo, doesn't it?
It does, and then it just fades off, and it kind of it's like it brings you in and then it just leaves you kind of dangling. It doesn't give you any, you know, there's no aftercare. You know, you're that's it.
Brilliant. We could talk about Rocky Horror for literally hours, and I mean, I literally could any day. But I just want to wrap this up by saying that it was important to us, probably important to, like, countless other people.
Definitely.
I couldn't even begin to imagine how many people, you know, realise their identity because of this film, which wasn't even going out of its way for that reason. It was just it was a film, you know, it's 70s for the sake of being 70s.
I mean, my whole family are obsessed with it. Like, my mum, my dad, me and my sister, we've all gone to productions about it, and, like, that's just fun.
Yeah. I think the difference between, like, this and the Glee episode, which we keep coming back to, is that the Glee episode is purposely trying to make points. Rocky Horror, yes, it's trying to make points, but it's not trying to shove them down your throat. Yeah. And I think that's the power of it, and I think that's why I'll always love it and you'll always love it.
Yeah.
And the whole point of this podcast is talking about things which have, like, influenced us and we love. Like, that's most of our episodes. But I don't know, I think, like, this has been the year anniversary film choice because it's so impactful for us, you know, like, we're probably going to end up doing more episodes on Rocky Horror or Campness or something. But, like, I don't even know where I'm going with this.
I mean, to be honest, we also really want to hear kind of, like, especially not restricting any ages, but especially people kind of around our age who feel the same way about it, because, I mean, like we've said, we did discover it because of the Glee episode. Truthfully, I think we both would have found it later on anyway, but I'm glad we found it when we did. I want to know how many people did discover it because of that, like,
or even through Tumblr. It had a presence on Tumblr.
True. You know, I'm just curious about what age you found it, what it meant to you. Did it take you a while to get into it? Because I can understand that as well. Like, maybe coming back to it later on and being like, oh.
I want to hear some people defend the Glee episode. That's my thing, because I'm sick of the slander. I enjoy it. I know it has its problems. I know Glee in general has its problems, as we're going to explore in other episodes probably. But I love it, and I want to hear some people agree with me. Yeah, because I'm sick of being slandered.
Pretty much. It's funny that you say in other episodes. It's going to be the one.
That's a hint.
But yeah, I want to hear people defend that Glee episode. Don't worry about coming and defending Glee. We're fully aware.
Oh god,
we are fully aware of the problems.
But on that note, I can't believe it's been a year of the White Noise podcast. I'm really happy we chose Rocky Horror because it's a fucking banger. And I'm just happy I had an excuse to watch it last night.
Oh, pretty much. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Excuse to talk about it as well. Like, it really just harken back to, as much as we like really analysing stuff, this whole podcast is just because we just wanted to talk about the things that we love.
Just love campy shit.
Yeah.
Love horror and we love camp. So, I mean, of course this was going to be the monumental film, wasn't it?
Yeah.
I'm also very aware of the fact that I've been hitting this the whole episode. You can't see it if you're just listening to the audio.
Yeah, no, you can't see it. It's fine. Yeah.
But
that's a point. If you are just now listening to the audio, we will be recording video.
Yes, we should have made that clear.
Yeah, I mean, as far as we can, because unfortunately we are going to have to go back to Zoom. So we will be in separate places, but I think we want to start putting as much more on video as we can. So yeah, if you are only listening to this audio and you would like to see what we look like, we're here on our YouTube channel.
Yeah, it feels really weird.
Yeah,
this whole one's feel a bit bizarre, but it's going to be interesting to hear it back and for people to listen.
Yeah,
because it's such a different situation, us being in the same room on camera.
Yeah,
I wonder how different it sounds.
It'd be interesting because, like, as much as, like, we definitely do enjoy having our conversations, doing it over Zoom sometimes feels like you're waiting for, like, the actor to say their line, whereas this has just felt like a really nice conversation.
Yeah, exactly. And you get the body language.
Yeah, it's a shame we couldn't do more in person. Whenever we can, we are going to try and do them in person because we also just enjoy it. We also just want an excuse to see each other more because, like Lyanna said, this is the first time we've seen each other in a year, at least, if not probably a bit more.
God, that's crazy. I'm really proud of this. Yeah, me
too.
And being on camera, showing our faces.
I'm super excited for, like, what's to come, to be honest. And that's from just being excited to see where we go, and also we've got some pretty cool stuff lined up soon.
Which might have already seen some of.
Yeah, some of it you've already seen. October we're super excited about. We've got some real fun stuff planned for then.
Yes.
You know,
very excited.
Yeah,
that's when, like, we reach our full power, isn't it?
True. Like, we never wanted this to be just a horror podcast, but we do appreciate we lean a lot into horror.
Yeah.
So Halloween's gonna be our shit. Yeah.
Yeah. So look forward to that.
Yeah.
I don't really know how to end this. Usually I do a fade out.
I know it's difficult because now we're on camera.
Different on video, but
yeah.
Maybe I'll take the final plunge and just say thank you for listening. Thank you if you were watching. Definitely let us know on social media what you think of Rocky Horror and Glee. Yeah. Typical, you know, YouTube stuff. Like and subscribe. Apparently that's what they say. I'm not a YouTuber, so. But if you want to, the buttons are there. Yeah. And with that, I guess that's a goodbye, isn't it? Bye.